All right, so we'll get to some of these big games here, and let's talk Ohio State, Michigan, of course, our first big game. We'll get to bets against the spread. I mean, look, 11-0, 11-0, Big Ten East championship, Big Ten championship, college football playoff championship. It just doesn't get much better than this. The drama of the Harbaugh decision, I do want to, I think it was the right thing clearly for Harbaugh to accept the penalty because clearly the Big Ten has a lot of information about this stuff. They don't levy a 3-game suspension right in the middle of the most important stretch of Michigan season and then float the idea that he could be suspended for the majority of next year if they don't have a whole boatload of evidence. So I'm assuming this was the right decision by Harbaugh to just accept the penalty. I still don't. We've already covered this ad nauseum. I don't love the idea of him being suspended. But if Michigan wins this game and Harbaugh's not on the sidelines, kind of shuts everybody up, right?
Absolutely. And if you're Ryan Day, probably don't want to show up in Columbus for a couple days. I think to your point, I think the evidence that the Big Ten had was probably just so overwhelming. And also I think for Michigan, it was one of those cases where the fight was worth having. It's worth having the gusto and the bravado and show your fan base, hey, we're fighting for our guy, we're fighting for our team. But when you go to court, a little discovery, you have to present some evidence, things get out.
Old discovery phase. Good old discovery.
It might not have gone well, considering the evidence that we talked about. So for Michigan, it's have your fight, show you believe in your guy. And at the same time, though, when the rubber kind of met the road, I think the Big Ten was right to issue the suspension based upon the evidence.
Michigan 3.5-point favorite at home. We get into the matchup here, and if Ryan Day wins, you can bet that Michigan fans are going to put an asterisk next to that for sure, which again goes back to my original point of why I don't like it happening in the regular season, even if it's totally justified. Is it crazy to suggest that this just comes down to the right side of the Ohio State offensive line? I mean, TreVeyon Henderson has been arguably the best running back in all of college football. I mean, the number of explosive plays, 20-plus yard runs, 100 yards from scrimmage, more touches than anybody. Like he has been since coming back against Wisconsin. He has been the best running back in college football. They already have the best wide receiver in college football. Michigan is the more complete team. They've won 2 in a row, and they're at home. They have equally awesome defensive fronts. Maybe Ohio State's is a touch better, but Michigan's offensive line is better than Ohio State's offensive line. I don't know what to make of the matchup, honestly. Like this is one of those where we've seen them come into this game trending in so many different directions, and then the outcomes not match up with those trend lines at all. And I would not be surprised at a Michigan blowout, at an Ohio State blowout, at a close Michigan win, or a close Ohio State win. There's not an outcome that would be surprising to me.
To your point, the last couple games have been decided by double digits. Like for a series that's had a lot of high stakes, the last couple really haven't been close. I think one of the factors that I'm going to be watching just kind of maybe that decides the game. I think, first of all, Ohio State's offensive line, to your point, how do they hold up? They've gotten better over the course of the season. I think Henderson coming back plays a role in that. So to me, big plays. We saw it last year when Michigan played Ohio State. We went into that game thinking, hey, can J.J. McCarthy hit the big plays and all that? Well, he did. And Donovan Edwards did too. So I think I kind of look at this as game breakers. Now you have Marvin Harrison Jr. and you got TreVeyon Henderson for Ohio State. You've got Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards for Michigan.
It's good stuff right there.
Which one of those two, like the game breakers, who breaks the one or two big plays? Because you have these two defenses that are probably it's going to be a stalemate between the two. Like last year, which one of those gives up, which defense gives up a big play, which offense can generate them. So I've got my eye on the 4 big playmakers here in this game and seeing which one of those can deliver a big play or two, because I think that might decide it. And also we have the quarterbacks in this game too, which I think are as fascinating on another level.
Well, okay, here's what's interesting. And this is, again, goes back to my point about the trend lines sometimes are impossible to follow into the game. Who's got the better quarterback?
Michigan.
Who's at home?
Michigan.
Who's got the better offensive line?
Michigan.
Who has the straight up head-to-head momentum?
Probably Ohio State, wouldn't you say?
No, Michigan's won 2 in a row.
Okay, in the series, yes.
Yeah.
I was going to say coming into this game, if you wanted to make a case that Ohio State had more momentum the last few weeks, I think you could.
Who's the better defense? Maybe Ohio State?
flip a coin. They're even like in success rate. They're both giving up like 9 points a game. So,
and I would take the two playmakers you mentioned for Ohio State. I would take over the playmakers for Michigan, but they're not much difference there. I just think that normally in a normal football game, when we give a big check mark to the quarterback play, the offensive line play, and where the game's being played, normally that's the check mark that matters. And that all is in favor of Michigan. But Harbaugh has to count for something. And I don't know if it's a critical fourth down decision, if it's noticing something with run fits, if it's how to cover Marvin Harrison when they move him around into the slot or something crazy to try to get him open. I don't know. There's got to be some value here to Jim Harbaugh not being on the sidelines that benefits Ohio State in some way. Otherwise, what's the point of paying these guys $10 million?
Well, is it with JJ McCarthy in the passing game? Because the last 2 weeks, Michigan couldn't block Penn State's defensive front and pass rush. We saw that early in the game. So they decided, let's just hand it off to Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, which was a smart decision.
Yeah.
But JJ McCarthy, he's been reportedly battling some sort of injury. Just 19 of 31 for 201 yards and an interception in the last 2 weeks. Is that, is it injury related? Is it not having Jim Harbaugh during the game? I don't know. I don't doubt JJ McCarthy. I know there's this potential injury concern too with Roman Wilson for this game, so the receiving corps could be missing a key piece. But I think that's the other part that kind of was mentioned here is the quarterback. Like, I don't want to say legacy for this game, but you have McCarthy with a chance to beat Ohio State again, and you've got Kyle McCord, who's been kind of up and down. And he could go on the road and maybe change the entire conversation about how we feel about Ohio State. If he goes on the road, plays well, and wins, if you're Ohio State, you could look at this and go say, hey, Maryland moved the ball through the air last week against Michigan's defense, 247 pass yards, which was the highest that Michigan's given up all season. So, if you're Marvin Harrison, Ryan Day, and Kyle McCord, you probably see some opportunities there to move the ball through the air.
Did Marvin Harrison win the Heisman Trophy this weekend?
I consider him one of the top 5 still remaining. I think it's open. Penix, Nix, Daniels, Marvin Harrison, and Carson Beck. And I think if Harrison has a good game, absolutely. Because I still think I don't think the winner has been decided yet.
I think it's as close as we've ever had a collection of players heading into the final regular season weekend.
Agree.
And I think obviously the Washington-Oregon discussion will be settled in the championship game, probably, most likely. But I think Marvin Harrison, if Ryan Day, because Ryan Day's, here's the thing about this game. I might be picking Ohio State outright because what happens in this game, as I've said now 3 times, everything feels like it's going one direction. And then because this rivalry is so big and so important and the gravity of it all means so much to every individual top to bottom in both organizations, I think you're going to get Ohio State's best. And the question is, can Michigan keep the wagon circled, for lack of a better term, and keep that whole like us against the world, America's team garbage that like really is sort of fabricated rat poison to some degree by Jim Harbaugh? Is that enough? And has Ohio State's offensive line gotten just good enough to run the ball to the left side? And is Kyle McCord just efficient enough? And if they force feed Marvin Harrison, 14 targets, 11 receptions, 122 yards, a pair of touchdowns, is that enough to win? And then he wins the Heisman? I think it's possible.
It's just like the Penn State game. Like, I think it's very possible. You have to figure Ryan Day and that offensive staff will find ways to isolate him, move him around, whatever it is to get the ball in his hands. We should note, and I think to be fair to Michigan, last week's game at Maryland was kind of just a trap game. So they didn't play their best game. It's entirely possible that it's just one bad data point that's just kind of an outlier. So I don't want to read too much into that, but I do think because their schedule has been so easy and we're looking for flaws or things that are happening. This is now 2 weeks where the passing game hasn't clicked. Maryland with Tagovailoa, good receivers, move the ball. You could see some openings here.
You're picking Michigan. Stop it.
Right. I'm trying to cover all
I'm
angles
taking
here.
the Buckeyes. I'm taking the Buckeyes. I'm taking Ohio State.
I will say this. I am just utterly fascinated. The conversation about what's going to happen after this game
I know.
is going to be unbelievable, because either you have Michigan, who beat Ohio State for the third year in a row, and to your point, the trend, like the sort of the storyline trend line here, because you have Ohio State, who's hungry. Michigan's won 2 in a row. It plays into it somehow. But you've got Ryan Day, who really wants this game. You could see all week, like just his comments, everything. He wants this game. So,
well, he needs the game.
He needs it, right? He needs it. But I just the coaching it's going to be such a fascinating conversation come Saturday after this game is over.
And to one last point to all those of complaining about the expanded playoff, removing value from the regular season, give me a break. Ohio State got in last year in the exact same situation, and they could get in again this year if they were to lose this game close on the road. So just don't tell me that getting into the playoffs removes anything from this game. They hate each other, and it's great.
They're
going to play
3 times next year. So
they're going to play so unbelievably hard every play. It does not matter that they could play again. It doesn't matter. They are going to play as hard as possible. There's no value removed from this game. It is undefeated Michigan versus undefeated Ohio State with everything on the line. It's great. It's great. It's everything you want out of college football. Go Bucks.
I'm picking Michigan.
I know.
In a close one at home.